everybody, this is Ella with the Cake Eccentric, and I wanted to lead you through a few ways that you can pipe roses out of buttercream icing. So the first thing everyone needs is stiff icing. You can make it homemade, follow the recipe on the blog, or you can actually use store-bought, which I'm using today. The one thing you need to do first is to make sure that you add some extra confectioner sugar. This will stiffen up your store-bought brand, and it will allow it to be the consistency you need to properly pipe a rose. So after that, the next thing that we need is a flower nail. This is a number 7 flower nail, which is actually wide enough for a rose. They come in other sizes, but I recommend number 7 for today. And you need to have some frosting and piping bags. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my piping bag with tip number 12 on the end. It's just an open tip. And I'm going to pipe a little bit of frosting right on the center of my nail. The next thing I'm going to do is add a piece of wax paper, or parchment paper works as well, and this is going to allow you to remove the rose from the nail when you're done piping. From here, you're going to take your bag with tip number 12 in it, and you're going to hold it at 90 degrees to your nail, and you're just going to pipe a mound of icing in the center. It doesn't have to be too tall. In fact, there's a good way to measure this, and I'll show you that in just a second. But you want to have a cone shape. It's wide on the bottom and narrow at the top. And after we start piping our petals, you're not going to see this anymore. This is just what we place our petals on. So, the next thing you want to do is grab your bag with your petal tip on it. This is tip 104. And I want you to notice that it's wide on the bottom and narrow at the top. And I want you to always keep that narrow pinched end up or either out, and I'll indicate when you're going to move this around. But that wide end is always going to be at the bottom or against the base of your mound of icing. So a good way to measure if your icing mound is tall enough is to hold your 104 next to this, and it should be about 1.5 to 2 of your 104 nails together. So you can see this is probably even just a little too tall, and in that case you can just pat this down. Stiff icing will allow you to kind of correct some of your mistakes with your fingers. So your next step is to take your 104 bag, and I want you not only to have this tip pointing up, but also pointing inward toward the center of your mound of icing. And you're going to squeeze as the icing comes out, and you're going to start to twist around in a circular motion, and you can see that it just created kind of a ribbon of icing around, and there's just a tiny little keyhole there at the top. You should cover your center, your mound of icing completely. You're not going to see this anymore as we start putting petals on. So your next step is to pipe your next row of petals, and we're going to pipe 3 this time, and you're going to start with your 104 tip just kind of in the center of the mound. And these are actually going to be just a little bit taller than this last petal we piped. And this time that pointed end is going to face directly up toward the ceiling. These petals point directly upward. There's 1, 2, and 3. And you can start to see that it's forming a rose. And you can see my rose is sliding a little bit on my nail. That's typical, and don't let that shake you at all. You can always just push it back into place. You can usually correct your mistakes, like I said, with your fingers. So your next row of petals will be 5 petals. You're going to start just a little bit lower on your mound, and this time that pointed end is actually not going to point up, but it's going to point out. And I recommend that you not pipe in front of you like this, because your wrist will start to bend in kind of an awkward, uncomfortable position, but instead you tilt the nail in toward you and you start to place your petals like this. And as you rotate, you'll notice that my bag doesn't really move. So let me do that again. Hopefully you can see this. So you're always going to be starting at 12 o'clock. If the nail that you're working on is the face of clock, you always want to start at 12 o'clock. So let's start piping. Here's 1 petal, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You can see one of my petals kind of drooped. And you know what, like I said, you can always fix your mistakes with your finger, so you can just pipe it. There you go. So you could stop right there, or you could go on to the next row and our last row of petals, and that's going to be 7. So that's going to be underneath our row of 5. And again, you're going to point your bag outward even more this time as you pipe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And there you have it. Okay, everybody, so we're going to do another way to pipe a rose. We're going to start off the same way, little icing on the nail and some parchment paper on top. And this time we're just going to use bag 104. We're going to skip making that mound with tip 12 and just use 104 instead. So, your wide end is on the bottom again. And you're just going to make, a little swirl. And go around the bottom again. And see, this time we're forming our base just with bag 104. And it's kind of like making that first petal, that ribbon that you make, all the way up. So I've done this about 3 times, and I formed a base that's, again, 1 1/2 the length of your 104 tip. And now you're going to do exactly what we did last time. You're going to tilt that tip inward, and you're going to pipe a ribbon covering the very top. Now we're going to do a row of 3 with our tip facing straight up and down. And it's wavering. And now we're going to do 5 petals, so I'm going to tilt the nail in towards me with the tip facing out. There you go. And then lastly, our row of 7 with the pinched end pointing even further outward. 4, 5, 6, and 7. There you go. Now, again, you can just remove this off your nail. And you want to let it dry before you put it on a cake, of course, so that you can handle it. If you're using store-bought icing, I recommend that you put it in the fridge, and it will expedite this process, make it a lot quicker for you to pull your roses off of your wax paper or your parchment paper. And our very last way to do a rose, I recommend for cake decorators or just starting out. I find that this kind of just helps the process, helps you get started and really get this method down. So again, little frosting on the nail and a piece of parchment or wax on top. And you're going to put, this time, just a little smudge of icing on top of this piece of paper. And instead of piping a mound, you're going to put a Hershey Kiss there in the center. And this is what we're going to use instead of frosting to place all of our petals on. And as you can see, it's obviously a lot stiffer, harder than frosting would be. So if you're having problems making the mound, or you find that it's always flopping over on you so much so that you can't really make a successful flower, try using some Hershey Kisses instead. And then just do what we've been doing from the beginning. That first petal, tilting the pointed end of your tip inward, squeezing and wrapping it all the way around the top. Now remember, you shouldn't see that mound of frosting underneath. Your Hershey Kiss should not be seen either, and it will stick out far more if you don't have this completely covered with petals because of the differentiation in color. So now we're going to do a set of 3. See how much taller that is than that center petal? And again, they're pointing straight up and down. And this time we're going to, of course, start working at 12 o'clock if you're facing your nail. And you're going to do a set of 5 with the tip pointing even further outward. And then finally, our set of 7 beneath that with our 104 tip pointing almost parallel to the nail itself. And there you have it. And of course, anybody who gets one of these flowers off a cake that you make will get that little surprise of chocolate in the center. And there you have it. So thank you everybody for joining me, and hopefully your rose making will be successful.